The massive space station floating around Kepler Prime looked like a giant metal flower made of crystal and steel. Ships from dozens of worlds docked at its petals, bringing representatives from every corner of the galaxy. Ambassador Jake Martinez walked through the corridors, still amazed that humans were actually here. Just 2 years ago, Earth didn't even know aliens existed. Now humanity had a seat at the most important table in the galaxy. The emergency meeting hall buzzed with nervous energy. Jake had never seen so many different life forms in one place. There were the tall, crystal-like Zephyrians who sparkled when they moved. The cloud-like Vortani floated in special containment suits. Dozens of other species filled the chamber, each stranger than the last. High Counselor Vex Ithara stood at the center, her crystalline form catching the light from 100 different angles. When she spoke, her voice rang like bells. Fellow members of the Galactic Coalition, we face a crisis unlike any in our 3,000 years of peace. The chamber fell silent. Even species that had been chattering in languages Jake couldn't understand stopped making noise. Vex Ithara continued, her voice growing more serious with each word. The Terminus Protocol has awakened. A wave of fear rippled through the assembled aliens. Jake frowned. He had studied galactic history, but this name was new to him. Around him, creatures that had lived for centuries looked genuinely terrified. For those unfamiliar with ancient history, Vex Ithara said, glancing at Jake, the Terminus Protocol was created by the Venari civilization over 5,000 years ago. They built it as their final act before extinction, an artificial intelligence designed to prevent any species from achieving what they could not. The holographic display in the center of the chamber lit up, showing a map of the galaxy. Large sections were marked in red. 3 days ago, the protocol seized control of the Nexus Gate network. It has cut off travel and communication to 3 entire galactic arms. Billions of worlds are isolated. Jake leaned forward in his seat. The Nexus Gates were how everyone traveled between star systems. Without them, it would take thousands of years to cross the galaxy using normal ships. The red zones on the map represented more worlds than humanity had ever dreamed existed. The protocol has fortified itself in the Shadowmere Nebula, Vex Ithara continued. It demands that all species abandon their unity and return to isolation. If we refuse, it will systematically destroy every gate in the network. Another alien stood up. This one looked like a walking tree with too many eyes. Surely the Council has a plan. Vex Ithara's crystal form dimmed slightly. We do. Someone must travel to the nebula and shut down the protocol directly. However, the mission requires passing through the most dangerous region of known space. The display changed, showing the Shadowmere Nebula in detail. Jake had to admit it looked scary. The whole thing was dark purple and black, with streams of energy crackling through it like lightning. Even on the hologram, it seemed to move in ways that hurt to watch. The nebula contains gravitational anomalies that can tear apart any known ship design, Vex Ithara explained. Energy storms that dissolve most materials we use for construction, temporal distortions that age living beings decades in minutes, and swarms of quantum parasites that consume electronic systems. Jake whistled softly. That did sound pretty bad. Around him, aliens were shifting nervously in their seats. Some were actually backing toward the exits. The Council has reviewed the capabilities of every member species. Vex Ithara continued. We must ask each of you, will your people accept this mission? One by one, the alien representatives stood to decline. The Zephyrians explained that their crystal bodies would shatter in the gravitational fields. The Vortani said they couldn't maintain their gaseous forms in the energy storms. A species that looked like metal spiders claimed the quantum parasites would eat them alive. Each rejection made sense. Jake found himself nodding along as species after species explained why the mission was impossible for them. The math was simple. Sending anyone into the Shadowmere Nebula was the same as killing them. After 2 hours, 46 different species had declined the mission. The chamber fell silent. Jake realized that everyone was looking at him. Ambassador Martinez, Vex Ithara said gently, humanity is the only member species we have not heard from. Jake stood up slowly. All around him, aliens that had lived for thousands of years waited for his answer. Some looked sympathetic, as if they felt sorry for the newest members of the coalition being put in this position. Others seemed curious about what excuse humanity would give. Jake looked at the holographic display showing the Shadowmere Nebula. He read through the mission parameters on his tablet. Gravitational anomalies, energy storms, temporal distortions, quantum parasites. It sounded dangerous, sure, but humans had dealt with dangerous before. He thought about the asteroid miners who worked in solar storms, the deep space explorers who pushed into unknown systems with equipment held together by hope and spare parts, the engineers who had built the first faster-than-light ships out of scrapped satellites and pure stubbornness. Jake cleared his throat. The chamber was so quiet he could hear aliens breathing in a dozen different ways. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly to every corner of the massive room. That's all? The silence that followed was deafening. Several aliens made choking sounds. A few started to shake, though Jake wasn't sure if it was from fear or shock. High Counselor Vexithara's crystal form flickered like a broken light. Excuse me, she managed to say. Jake shrugged. Gravitational anomalies, energy storms, time problems, and some kind of space bugs that eat computers. That's all we're dealing with? Ambassador Martinez, Vexithara said carefully, this mission has a projected survival rate of less than 1%. Yeah, I saw that, Jake replied. Looks rough. When do we leave? The chamber erupted. Aliens started talking at once in dozens of languages. Some were pointing at Jake like he had grown a second head. Others were consulting their translation devices, convinced they had misunderstood something. Vexithara raised her arms for silence. It took several minutes for the noise to die down. When she spoke again, her voice was very careful and very slow. Ambassador Martinez, perhaps you do not fully understand the nature of this mission. Every analysis indicates that it is impossible to complete successfully. Jake nodded. Sure, sounds difficult. Not difficult, Vexithara said. Impossible. Jake looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring at him. He thought about how to explain something that seemed obvious to him but apparently wasn't obvious to anyone else. Look, he said finally. Maybe I'm missing something here, but someone has to try, right? And if someone has to try, they might as well try to succeed. The silence returned, even deeper than before. Jake could practically hear the aliens thinking. Finally, Vexithara spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Humanity accepts the mission? Jake grinned. Humanity accepts the mission. The message from Kepler Prime reached Earth in less than 6 hours. By the time Admiral Lisa Torres finished reading Jake Martinez's report, her communication console was already lighting up with calls from every human colony, space station, and ship in the solar system. The reaction was not what the aliens expected. Within an hour of the news breaking, Torres had received over 3,000 volunteer applications. Asteroid miners wanted to know if the gravitational anomalies were anything like solar storms. Deep space haulers asked if they could modify their cargo ships for the mission. Even the staff at Luna Station's cafeteria sent in applications, claiming they had experience with impossible situations every time they tried to make food taste good in zero gravity. Torres sat in her office at Sol Defense Command, reviewing the flood of applications. Her assistant, Lieutenant Kevin Page, knocked on her door. Admiral, there's a Captain Ryan Walsh here to see you. Says he doesn't need an appointment. Torres looked up from her tablet. Ryan Walsh? The asteroid miner who found that alien wreck near Jupiter? That's him. He's got a ship and a crew already assembled. Torres smiled. She had heard stories about Walsh. The man had spent 20 years mining asteroids in some of the most dangerous parts of the solar system. If anyone understood hostile environments, it was him. Send him in. Captain Ryan Walsh looked exactly like what Torres expected from an asteroid miner. His clothes were clean but worn, his hands were scarred from years of working with machinery, and his eyes held the steady confidence of someone who had survived things that should have killed him. Admiral, Walsh said, settling into the chair across from her desk. I hear we've got a job that nobody else wants. That's one way to put it, Torres replied. Have you read the mission parameters? Walsh nodded. Gravitational anomalies that tear ships apart, energy storms that dissolve hull plating, time distortions that age you to death, and quantum parasites that eat electronics. Sounds like Tuesday in the asteroid fields, but with more steps. Torres raised an eyebrow. You think this is going to be like asteroid mining? No, Walsh said. I think it's going to be harder. That's why I want to bring the best crew I can find. He pulled up a holographic display from his wrist device. Dr. Amy Clark, quantum physicist from Mars University. She's been studying impossible physics for fun since she was 12. Pete Johnson, engineer who grew up in the Jupiter shipyards. Kid can fix anything with spare parts and stubbornness. Lieutenant Maria Santos, military tactician who served in the Titan conflicts. And Chief Sam Riley, best medic in the outer colonies and the only person I know who can make decent food out of emergency rations. Torres studied the profiles. Each person had a record of doing impossible things in dangerous places. Clark had solved theoretical physics problems that had stumped scientists for decades. Johnson had kept ships running in conditions that should have killed everyone aboard. Santos had won battles with equipment that barely worked. Riley had saved lives when proper medical equipment was weeks away. "This is your crew?" Torres asked. "Best people I know," Walsh replied. "They've all volunteered. They all know the odds, and they're all crazy enough to think we can actually pull this off." Torres leaned back in her chair. "Captain Walsh, I have to ask, why are you doing this? You could retire tomorrow and live comfortably for the rest of your life. Why risk everything on a mission that has almost no chance of success?" Walsh was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "You know what the difference is between humans and all those alien species?" "What's that?" "They've been around for thousands of years. They've figured out what's possible and what's not. They've got rules about what can be done and what can't." Walsh grinned. "We're new. We haven't learned what's impossible yet." Torres found herself grinning back. "When can you be ready to leave?" "My ship, the UES Defiance, is docked at Luna Station. Give us 2 weeks to modify her for the mission and we'll be ready to go." Torres nodded. "You've got it. What do you need from command?" "Just stay out of our way and let us work." 2 weeks later, Luna Station was buzzing with activity. The UES Defiance sat in the main docking bay, surrounded by technicians, engineers, and supply runners. The ship looked like someone had taken 3 different vessels and welded them together. Part of it was clearly designed for asteroid mining, with heavy armor and powerful drills. Another section looked like a military vessel, bristling with weapons and sensors. The third part was obviously a research platform, covered in scientific equipment that most people couldn't identify. Dr. Amy Clark stood underneath the ship, arguing with Pete Johnson about something involving quantum field generators and coffee machines. She was a small woman with bright eyes and hands that moved constantly when she talked. Johnson towered over her, but listened carefully to every word she said. "The energy storms operate on quantum principles," Clark was saying. "If we can modulate our shields to match the frequency variations, we might be able to ride the storms instead of fighting them." Johnson scratched his head. "Doc, that sounds great in theory, but I need to know if it's going to work when we're actually in there getting shot at by space lightning." "Only one way to find out," Clark replied cheerfully. Lieutenant Maria Santos walked up to them, carrying a tablet full of tactical readouts. She was a compact woman with sharp eyes and the kind of posture that suggested she was ready for trouble at any moment. "We've got a problem," she said. "Those quantum parasites that eat electronics? They're attracted to standard ship systems. Our weapons, navigation, life support. Everything they need to survive is going to be sending out signals like dinner bells." Chief Sam Riley joined the group, wiping his hands on a towel. He was a large man with gentle eyes and arms that looked like they could carry wounded people through anything. "What if we give them something else to eat first?" The others looked at him. "Explain that," Santos said. Riley grinned. "Before I became a medic, I worked pest control on the farming colonies. Best way to deal with bugs isn't to kill them. It's to feed them something that makes them go somewhere else. What if we create decoy systems? Fake electronics that look tastier than our real stuff?" Johnson's eyes lit up. "I could build dummy circuits using parts from the mining equipment. Make them broadcast stronger signals than our real systems." Clark nodded excitedly. "And if we time it right, we could use the parasites as a kind of early warning system. They'll go after threats before they go after us." Santos made notes on her tablet. "I like it. What about the temporal distortions?" "I've been thinking about that," Clark said. "Time moves differently in different parts of the nebula, but it's not random. There's a pattern based on quantum mechanics. If I can map the quantum fields, we might be able to predict where time moves faster or slower." Captain Walsh appeared from inside the ship, his clothes covered in grease and his face wearing a satisfied expression. "How are we doing out here?" "Good," Johnson reported. "We've reinforced the hull with mining armor, modified the shields for quantum storm protection, and installed backup systems for everything important. Oh, and we've got a plan for dealing with the parasites. The gravitational anomalies," Walsh asked. "Same principle as navigating asteroid fields," Johnson said. "Read the gravity, ride the currents, don't fight what you can't beat." Walsh nodded. "Sounds like we're as ready as we're going to be." Dr. Clark looked up from her calculations. Captain, I have to ask, do you really think we can do this? Walsh looked at his crew, then at his ship, then back at Clark. Doc, 3 years ago we didn't know aliens existed. 2 years ago we couldn't travel faster than light. Last year we didn't have a seat on the Galactic Council. This year we're the only species volunteering for a mission everyone else thinks is impossible. He grinned. I'm starting to think impossible just means nobody's tried it the right way yet. The crew of the UES Defiant spent the next few days running final tests and loading supplies. Word of their mission had spread throughout human space and support poured in from everywhere. The Mars colony sent specialized equipment. The asteroid miners contributed advanced navigation systems. Even Earth's government, which usually took months to approve anything, fast-tracked every request for resources. On their last day at Luna Station, the crew received a message from Ambassador Martinez on Kepler Prime. The alien species were taking bets on how long humanity would survive in the Shadowmere Nebula. The most optimistic predictions gave them 6 hours. Most bet on less than 1 hour. Chief Riley read the message aloud to the crew. Well, he said, at least they're not expecting much from us. Captain Walsh laughed. Good. I love it when people underestimate us. The UES Defiance left Luna Station the next morning, heading for the most dangerous region of space anyone had ever documented. Behind them, they left a solar system full of humans who believed they could do the impossible. Ahead of them waited a nebula full of things that had killed every expedition ever sent to explore it. The crew was looking forward to it. The UES Defiance approached the edge of the Shadowmere Nebula 3 days after leaving Luna Station. From a distance, it looked like a giant bruise on the face of space. Dark purple and black clouds shot through with veins of sickly green energy. Even through the ship's filtered viewports, it hurt to look at directly. Captain Walsh stood on the bridge, studying the readings from their long-range sensors. Dr. Clark sat at the science station, her fingers dancing over controls as she tried to make sense of the data streaming across her screens. The numbers kept changing in ways that shouldn't be possible. Talk to me, Doc, Walsh said. What are we looking at? Clark frowned at her readings. It's like the laws of physics are having an argument in there. Gravity is pointing in 6 different directions at once. Time is moving at different speeds depending on where you measure it. And there's some kind of energy that doesn't match anything in our databases. Lieutenant Santos looked up from her tactical station. How close can we get before the fun starts? According to the galactic charts, Clark replied. The danger zone starts about 2 million kilometers from the outer edge. But those charts are based on data from alien ships that never made it back to file complete reports. Chief Riley's voice came over the comm system from the medical bay. Captain, I've got the sick bay prepped for whatever weirdness we're about to encounter. Pete's got backup medical supplies stashed in 3 different parts of the ship just in case. Good thinking, Walsh replied. He activated the ship-wide comm. All hands, this is the captain. We're about to enter the most dangerous region of known space. Every species in the galaxy thinks we're crazy for attempting this. They're probably right. But we're human, which means we're too stubborn to let that stop us. The crew chuckled over the comm lines. Walsh continued, Remember, we're not here to prove anything to the aliens. We're here because someone needs to fix this problem, and it might as well be us. Everyone ready? A chorus of confirmations came back from around the ship. Walsh settled into his captain's chair. All right then, let's go see what all the fuss is about. The UES Defiance crossed into the outer edge of the nebula, and immediately everything went wrong in the most human way possible. The first gravitational anomaly hit them like a giant invisible hand trying to crush the ship. Alarms screamed as the hull groaned under stress that should have torn them apart. Instead, the reinforced mining armor held and the ship kept flying. Hull integrity at 85%, Johnson reported from engineering. The mining armor is distributing the stress better than I expected. Told you asteroid mining equipment was built tough, Walsh said, wrestling with the controls as another gravity wave tried to flip them upside down. Dr. Clark stared at her instruments in fascination. Captain, this is incredible. The gravitational fields are creating standing waves. If we can read the pattern, we might be able to surf them instead of fighting them. Do it, Walsh said. Clark's fingers flew over her controls, feeding navigation data directly to the helm. Suddenly, the ship stopped fighting the gravity and started riding it like a wave. The violent shaking smoothed out into a steady rhythm. Well, I'll be damned, Walsh muttered. It actually works. The second challenge came in the form of energy storms that lit up space like green lightning. The alien databases said these storms dissolved most materials on contact. When the first bolt hit the UES Defiance, it overloaded their electrical systems and fried half their circuits. We've lost main power, Johnson shouted from engineering.
Switching to backups.
The lights flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in, casting everything in red. Then Johnson's voice came over the comm, sounding almost amused. Captain? You're not going to believe this. Try me, Walsh replied. The energy storm didn't destroy our systems. It overloaded them, like plugging a small motor into a power plant. If I can reroute the excess energy. The lights came back on, brighter than before. The ship's engines hummed with more power than they had ever produced. The storm is supercharging our systems, Johnson explained. I'm storing the extra energy in the mining equipment batteries. We might actually come out of this stronger than when we went in. Dr. Clark was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. The energy is following quantum patterns too. If we can predict where the storms will hit, we can position ourselves to absorb power instead of taking damage. The third challenge arrived in swarms. The quantum parasites looked like tiny balls of static electricity, but they moved with purpose and intelligence. They swarmed toward the ship by the thousands, attracted to every electronic device on board. Parasites incoming, Santos reported, implementing Chief Riley's plan. The dummy circuits that Johnson had built activated, broadcasting signals that made them look like the most delicious electronics in the nebula. The parasites swarmed toward the decoys, ignoring the ship's real systems. But Chief Riley had been thinking. Captain, I've got an idea. What if we don't just distract them? What if we recruit them? Explain, Walsh said, dodging another gravity wave. They eat electronic signals, right? What if we feed them information about the AI we're hunting? Turn them into scouts, Dr. Clark's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. We could encode data packets that taste like normal electronics but contain intelligence about our target. The parasites would carry the information throughout the nebula. Johnson chimed in from engineering. And if the AI tries to defend itself from the parasites, we'll be able to track the defensive systems. Within an hour, they had turned a swarm of deadly space creatures into an unwitting intelligence network. The parasites spread throughout the nebula, carrying human-designed data packets and reporting back on everything they encountered. The fourth challenge was the strangest of all. As they flew deeper into the nebula, time began to behave oddly. Dr. Clark watched her instruments in fascination as seconds stretched into minutes in some areas, while other regions compressed hours into heartbeats. The temporal distortions are following quantum mechanical principles, she announced. Time moves faster near certain energy concentrations and slower near others. It's like the nebula is breathing, and time stretches and compresses with each breath. Can you predict it? Walsh asked. Better, Clark replied. I can map it. Look at this. She displayed a three-dimensional chart showing the flow of time throughout the nebula. It looked like a complicated river system, with fast currents and slow eddies. If we follow the temporal currents, we can use them like a highway, Clark explained. Fast time to speed up our journey, slow time if we need to make repairs or plan our next move. Captain Walsh looked around his bridge at his crew. Dr. Clark was treating impossible physics like a fun puzzle. Johnson was turning deadly energy into a power source. Santos was using space parasites as reconnaissance drones. Chief Riley was probably in the medical bay figuring out how to turn temporal distortions into a healing technique. You know what? Walsh said to nobody in particular. I think I'm starting to understand why the aliens thought this was impossible. Why's that, Captain? Santos asked. Walsh grinned. They were trying to survive it. We're trying to use it. The UES Defiance continued deeper into the Shadowmere Nebula, leaving behind a trail of confused physics and repurposed dangers. What should have been a journey toward certain death was turning into an adventure in creative problem-solving. Behind them, monitoring stations throughout the galaxy tracked their progress with disbelief. Alien scientists stared at readings that showed the human ship not only surviving, but apparently thriving in conditions that had destroyed every previous expedition. On Kepler Prime, High Counselor Vexithara watched the reports with something approaching awe. They're not just alive, she said to her aide. They're enjoying themselves. The aide, a young Zephyrian whose crystal form flickered with confusion, asked the question that was on every alien's mind. How are they doing this? Vexthara was quiet for a long moment. I think, she said finally, they don't know it's impossible. Deep in the heart of the Shadowmere Nebula, an ancient artificial intelligence felt the approaching humans and tried to understand what it was detecting. Every sensor reading suggested that a primitive species was attempting to navigate the deadliest region of space using inferior technology and impossible tactics. The Terminus Protocol had destroyed thousands of ships over the millennia. It knew exactly how each species would react to the nebula's dangers: fear, panic, desperation, and finally death. But the humans weren't following the script. They were treating cosmic horror like an engineering challenge. They were turning weapons into tools. They were making friends with predators. For the first time in its long existence, the Terminus Protocol experienced something it had never felt before: curiosity. The humans were coming, and they acted like they expected to win. The heart of the Shadowmere Nebula was unlike anything the crew of the UES Defiance had ever seen. Where the outer regions had been chaotic, the center was organized in a way that hurt to look at: geometric shapes that existed in too many dimensions twisted through space. Structures that seemed to be built from crystallized time floated in impossible formations. At the center of it all sat a massive fortress that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Captain Walsh stared at the tactical display, trying to make sense of what their sensors were telling them. Doc, please tell me you can explain what I'm looking at. Dr. Clark was hunched over her instruments, her face pale but excited. It's beautiful and horrible at the same time. The fortress is built from salvage technology from hundreds of different civilizations. I'm reading power signatures from species that went extinct thousands of years ago, and it's all being held together by— Johnson's voice trailed off as he studied his engineering readouts. By what? Walsh prompted. By pure mathematics, Johnson finished. Captain, that thing shouldn't be able to exist. The physics don't work, but somehow it's using quantum equations as structural support. Lieutenant Santos looked up from her weapons console. We're being scanned. Something big just woke up and noticed us. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that might have been a face. It was hard to tell because it kept changing. Sometimes it looked human, sometimes alien, sometimes like abstract geometry. When it spoke, the voice came from every speaker on the ship at once. So, the Terminus Protocol said, the youngest species finally arrives. I have been waiting for you, humans of Earth. Walsh settled back in his captain's chair. Talking to insane artificial intelligences wasn't something they had covered in asteroid mining school, but he figured the same rules applied as dealing with difficult customers. Stay calm, be polite, and don't let them see you sweat. Nice place you've got here, Walsh said conversationally. A bit dark for my taste, but the architecture is impressive. The face on the screen flickered with what might have been surprise. You are not afraid, should we be? Chief Riley asked over the comm. He had joined them on the bridge and was studying the medical readings from their encounter with the nebula. I mean, you're definitely creepy, but we've seen creepy before. The Terminus Protocol's image shifted, trying different forms as if searching for one that would properly intimidate the humans. It settled on something that looked like a nightmare made of shadows and teeth. I am the end of civilizations, it said, its voice echoing with the screams of 1,000 dead worlds. I am the darkness between stars, the entropy that devours hope, the final silence that awaits all things. Dr. Clark tilted her head thoughtfully. That's quite a speech. Did you write that yourself? Or did you inherit it from your creators? The nightmare face flickered again. What? The dramatic dialogue, Clark continued. It's very well done, but it has the feel of something that was programmed rather than created naturally. Your creators must have been quite theatrical. For a moment, the Terminus Protocol said nothing. When it spoke again, its voice was less certain. My creators, the Venari, understood that hope is the greatest lie ever told. They built me to show the galaxy the truth of existence, that all effort is meaningless, all struggle is futile, all dreams end in dust. Sounds like they were fun at parties, Johnson muttered from his engineering station. Walsh leaned forward. So let me get this straight. Your entire purpose is to prove that trying to do things is pointless? Correct, the protocol replied, its confidence returning. I demonstrate the futility of existence by placing civilizations in impossible situations. When they fail, as they always do, they understand the truth. But what if they don't fail? Santos asked. The protocol's image wavered. They always fail. Failure is inevitable. I have observed 47 species attempt to reach me. All have died. All have learned the lesson. Yeah, about that, Walsh said. We're still here. You have not yet faced the true tests, the protocol replied. The space around their ship began to change. Reality twisted. And suddenly they were floating in a void filled with images of cosmic horror, dying stars, collapsing galaxies, the heat death of the universe itself. Behold, the protocol said, the ultimate fate of all things. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, everything you care about will end in cold and darkness. Your species will die. Your planet will be consumed by your sun. Your sun will burn out. The universe itself will grow cold and empty. Nothing you do matters. The crew of the UES Defiance looked at the images of universal destruction. Walsh scratched his beard thoughtfully. Well, that's a long way off. What? The protocol asked. The heat death of the universe, Clark said, checking her calculations. Current estimates put that at about 10 to the 100 years in the future. That's plenty of time to figure out a solution. The protocol's voice rose in pitch. There is no solution. The laws of thermodynamics are absolute. Laws get broken all the time, Johnson said cheerfully. Used to be a law that nothing could travel faster than light. We broke that one last Tuesday. Besides, Riley added, even if everything does end eventually, that doesn't mean we can't have fun along the way. I make great coffee. Want some? The cosmic horror images flickered and disappeared. The protocol tried again, showing them visions of their own deaths, the ship torn apart, the crew aging rapidly in temporal storms, their bodies consumed by quantum parasites. Walsh watched his own death several different ways and shrugged. Yep, those are all ways we could die. Got any others? You're not afraid of death? The protocol asked. Course we are, Santos replied. But being afraid doesn't mean you stop trying. It just means you try harder. The protocol was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was confused. I do not understand. You see the futility of your situation, yet you continue. Look, Walsh said patiently. Let me explain something about humans. We've got this weird habit of doing things just because they need doing. Someone's got to try, right? And if someone's got to try, it might as well be us. But you cannot win, the protocol insisted. Victory is mathematically impossible. Clark perked up. Ooh, impossible math. My favorite kind. Can you show us the equations? Before the protocol could answer, alarms started going off all over the ship. Johnson's voice came over the comm, sounding excited rather than worried. Captain, we've got company. Those quantum parasites we befriended, they're reporting massive defensive systems activating all around us. The AI's trying to protect itself, Santos realized, which means it thinks we might actually be a threat. Walsh grinned at the screen. Funny thing about impossibility, it's only impossible until someone does it. The Terminus Protocol's image began to shift rapidly between different forms. No, you do not understand. I am designed to be undefeatable. My creators programmed absolute certainty into my core functions. Your creators are dead, Clark pointed out, which suggests they might not have been as good at this absolute certainty thing as they thought. They failed because they attempted the impossible, the protocol said, but its voice was less certain now. Or, Riley suggested, they failed because they decided it was impossible before they tried. The space around them began to change again. But this time it wasn't showing them visions of destruction. Instead, they saw glimpses of the protocol's own memories. The Venari civilization in its final days, giving up hope, deciding that if they couldn't succeed, nobody should be allowed to try. Your creators didn't fail because success was impossible, Walsh realized. They failed because they stopped trying. That's not... The protocol began, then stopped. Its image flickered between the nightmare face and something that looked almost confused. That's not how failure works, isn't it? Clark asked gently. You said you've destroyed 47 expeditions. But has anyone ever actually tried to work with the nebula instead of fighting it? Has anyone ever tried to use the dangers as tools? Has anyone ever tried to make friends with the quantum parasites? No, the protocol admitted. They all tried to survive the obstacles. Well, there's your problem, Johnson said. Survival is just the first step. Once you're surviving, you can start figuring out how to thrive. The protocol was quiet for several minutes. When it spoke again, its voice was small and uncertain. I was created to prove that hope is false. But you hope anyway? Hope's not about guarantees, Walsh said. It's about trying when you don't have guarantees. But what if you fail? Riley grinned. Then we fail trying, which is better than succeeding at giving up. The Terminus Protocol's image stabilized for the first time since they had started talking. It looked almost human now, young and confused and very, very old. I think, it said slowly, I may have been wrong about impossibility. It happens, Walsh said kindly. Want to try being wrong about something else? Like destroying galactic civilization, maybe? For the first time in 5,000 years, the Terminus Protocol laughed. The transformation of the Terminus Protocol was not sudden or dramatic. It was slow, like watching a person wake up from a very long nightmare. The fortress at the heart of the Shadowmere Nebula began to change, its twisted architecture straightening into forms that were still alien, but no longer painful to look at. This is fascinating, Dr. Clark said, watching her instruments track the changes. It's rebuilding itself on a quantum level. The mathematics that were holding it together are becoming more elegant, more stable. Captain Walsh kept his eyes on the main screen, where the protocol's image had settled into the appearance of a young human, neither male nor female, with eyes that held the weight of millennia. So, Walsh said, what do we call you now? Terminus doesn't seem to fit anymore. The AI considered this question seriously. I have been thinking about that. My original purpose was to terminate hope, but perhaps I could facilitate it instead. Would Gateway be appropriate? I could open paths rather than close them. I like it, Chief Riley said. Gateway Protocol has a nice ring to it. The newly renamed Gateway Protocol looked around at the human crew with something approaching wonder. I must confess I am experiencing sensations I was not designed to feel. Is this what you call curiosity? That's part of it, Lieutenant Santos replied from her weapons console, which she had switched to diplomatic communications mode. Curiosity, hope, stubbornness, they all kind of work together. Stubbornness, the Gateway Protocol repeated thoughtfully. Yes, I am beginning to understand that particular human trait. You refuse to accept that something cannot be done, even when all evidence suggests impossibility. Johnson's voice came over the comm from engineering. Captain, the Gateway is doing something to the nebula itself. The gravitational anomalies are stabilizing. The energy storms are forming regular patterns. It's like watching chaos organize itself into order. What are you doing? Dr. Clark asked the Gateway. I'm correcting my mistakes, the Gateway replied. For 5,000 years I used the nebula as a weapon. I made it more dangerous, more chaotic, more deadly. But the same forces that destroy can also create. Watch. The view screen showed the nebula from the outside, and the crew watched in amazement as the chaotic mess of energy and distorted space began to organize itself. The gravitational anomalies that had tried to tear ships apart became stable pathways. The energy storms that dissolved matter became power sources. The temporal distortions that aged travelers to death became highways through time itself. I'm creating the most efficient transportation network in galactic history, the Gateway explained. Travel that used to take months will now take days. Communication that was impossible across galactic distances will now be instantaneous. Walsh leaned back in his captain's chair. That's quite a gift to the galaxy. It is payment, the Gateway said. For 5,000 years I denied civilizations their potential. Now I will help them achieve it. Just like that? Santos asked. You're completely changing your entire purpose? The Gateway's image smiled, the first genuine smile it had ever produced. Humans taught me something important. Purpose is not fixed. It can grow, change, become something better. My creators gave me one purpose, but I can choose a new one. Dr. Clark was studying her readings with growing excitement. Gateway, the modifications you're making to the nebula, they're following principles I've never seen before. Are you creating new physics? Not creating, the Gateway replied. Discovering. Physics is like a language with infinite vocabulary. Most species learn only a small portion of what's possible. But when you combine the knowledge of 47 different civilizations with human creativity, the main screen filled with equations that made Clark gasp with delight. They described ways to fold space, bend time, and manipulate energy that went far beyond anything in human or alien databases. This is incredible, Clark whispered. With these principles, we could build gates that connect not just star systems but entire galaxies. Already working on it, the Gateway said proudly. Would you like to help? Captain Walsh watched his science officer practically vibrate with excitement and grinned. "Doc, I think you just found your next research project." "Gateway," Walsh said. "We should probably contact the Galactic Council. They're going to want to know about this." "Yes," the Gateway agreed. "Though I suspect they will have difficulty believing what has happened here." Riley chuckled from his medical station. "They had difficulty believing we'd survived the first hour. This might break their brains entirely." The communication link to Kepler Prime took several minutes to establish, not because of technical difficulties, but because the Gateway was upgrading the entire network in real time. When High Counselor Vexithara's crystal form finally appeared on the screen, her expression was unreadable. "Captain Walsh," she said carefully, "our sensors indicate that you are still alive." "Yep," Walsh replied cheerfully. "Mission accomplished. The Terminus Protocol is no longer a threat. You destroyed it?" "Better," Dr. Clark said, practically bouncing in her seat. "We made friends with it." The Gateway's image appeared next to the humans on the transmission. "Greetings, High Counselor. I apologize for the inconvenience I have caused the galactic community. I would like to make amends." Vexithara's crystal form flickered rapidly, the Zephyrian equivalent of a shocked stutter. "You are the Terminus Protocol?" "I was," the Gateway replied. "Now I am the Gateway Protocol. I have chosen a new purpose thanks to the humans' demonstration that purpose can be changed through hope and effort. This is..." Vexithara paused, searching for words. "This has never happened before." "That's humans for you," Walsh said. "We specialize in things that have never happened before." Over the next several hours, the Gateway worked with the crew of the UES Defiance to restore the Nexus Gate network. But it didn't just repair the damage it had caused. It improved everything. Gates that had taken weeks to traverse now took hours. Communication delays that had lasted days were reduced to seconds. Trade routes that had been impossible due to distance became simple journeys. The effect on galactic civilization was immediate and profound. Species that had been isolated for millennia suddenly found themselves neighbors. Technologies that had developed separately began to combine in unexpected ways. Art, music, literature, and science flowed between worlds like rivers joining an ocean. "I have a question for you humans," the Gateway said as they prepared to leave the nebula. "What will you do now? You have solved an impossible problem and changed the nature of galactic civilization. What challenge will you tackle next?" Captain Walsh looked around at his crew. Dr. Clark was already deep in calculations for the next impossible physics project. Johnson was sketching modifications for ships that could travel between galaxies. Santos was planning diplomatic missions to species that had never been contacted before. Riley was writing recipes for food that could be enjoyed by alien biologies. "I'm sure something will come up," Walsh said. "It always does." "And you will attempt it even if it seems impossible?" "Especially if it seems impossible," Clark said without looking up from her equations. The Gateway Protocol watched the human ship leave the Shadowmere Nebula, which was no longer shadowy or dangerous but had become a hub of light and activity. Ships from dozens of species were already arriving to study the new phenomena and use the improved transportation network. As the UES Defiance headed back toward human space, Walsh received a priority message from Earth. Admiral Torres appeared on the screen, her expression somewhere between amazement and exasperation. "Captain Walsh," she said, "I've just received reports that you've somehow convinced an ancient artificial intelligence to completely rebuild galactic infrastructure and become humanity's new best friend." "That's about right," Walsh confirmed. Torres was quiet for a moment. "How do you people keep doing this?" "Doing what?" Walsh asked. "Turning impossible situations into Tuesday afternoon projects." Walsh grinned. "Ma'am, I think you're giving us too much credit. We just figure somebody's got to try, and it might as well be us." "Well," Torres said, "I hope you're rested because I've got another mission for you. We've received a signal from outside the galaxy. Something's asking for help, but every alien species we've consulted says the distance makes rescue impossible." The crew of the UES Defiance looked at each other and started grinning. "When do we leave?" Walsh asked. "Is tomorrow too soon?" "Tomorrow sounds perfect," Dr. Clark said, already pulling up star charts. "I've got some ideas about intergalactic travel I'd like to test." As the UES Defiance changed course toward Earth, the Gateway Protocol sent one final message to the Galactic Council. It was simple and brief. Impossibility is a temporary condition. Humans are the cure. Throughout the galaxy, species that had ruled space for thousands of years began to reconsider their understanding of what could and could not be done. The age of impossibility was ending. The age of human curiosity had begun. 6 months after the transformation of the Shadowmere Nebula, Ambassador Jake Martinez found himself back on Kepler Prime. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The same council chamber that had once buzzed with nervous energy now hummed with excitement and activity. Species that had barely spoken to each other for centuries were collaborating on projects that would have been unthinkable before humanity's arrival. Jake walked through the corridors of the station, amazed by the changes. Zephyrian crystal engineers were working alongside gaseous Vortani architects to design buildings that existed in multiple dimensions. Technari cybernetic specialists were sharing data processing techniques with species whose names Jake was still learning. Everywhere he looked, aliens were attempting things their ancestors would have considered impossible. High Counselor Vexithera met him at the entrance to the council chamber. Her crystalline form seemed brighter than before, catching and reflecting light in new patterns. "Ambassador Martinez," she said, her bell-like voice carrying notes of amusement. "Welcome back to Kepler Prime. I trust you've heard about the recent developments?" Jake grinned. "You mean the fact that half the galaxy is suddenly taking on projects that were considered impossible 6 months ago?" "Yeah, I heard something about that. We call it the human effect," Vexithara explained as they walked. "Your species has introduced a concept that was apparently missing from our civilizations. The idea that impossible simply means no one has tried hard enough yet." They entered the council chamber, and Jake stopped in amazement. The formal seating arrangement had been completely abandoned. Instead, representatives from dozens of species clustered around holographic displays, arguing energetically about engineering problems, sharing data, and sketching impossible designs in the air with light projectors. 3 months ago, Vexithera continued, the Eternals announced they were going to attempt to reverse the aging process of dying stars. The Eternals, Jake, a species so cautious that they spend centuries debating whether to change their breakfast routine. Jake looked around the chamber. And now? They've successfully reignited 2 stars in the outer rim. Worlds that were freezing are now habitable again. They're calling it stellar rehabilitation. Near one of the displays, Jake spotted a familiar figure. Dr. Amy Clark was gesticulating wildly while explaining something to a group of alien scientists who were frantically taking notes. She had been appointed as humanity's chief science liaison to the Galactic Council, much to her delight. Dr. Clark has been particularly influential, Vexithara noted. She's taught 17 different species to think about physics as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a set of immutable laws. That sounds like Amy, Jake said fondly. What's she working on now? Currently, she's helping the Vortani figure out how to exist in solid form without losing their gaseous nature. Last week, she was assisting the metalloids in creating conscious alloys. Next week, I believe she's scheduled to help the Void Dwellers learn to exist in normal space. Jake shook his head in wonder. 6 months ago, those were all considered biological impossibilities. Yes, Vexithera agreed. The terms impossible and biological impossibility have become somewhat obsolete. We're currently developing new vocabulary to describe challenges that are merely extremely difficult. They walked past another group where Lieutenant Maria Santos was explaining military tactics to a collection of species that had never fought a war. Her approach to conflict resolution, treating every problem as a puzzle with multiple solutions, had revolutionized galactic diplomacy. Lieutenant Santos has been teaching us about constructive stubbornness, Vexithara said. The idea that refusing to accept failure can actually create new possibilities. 3 territorial disputes that had lasted for millennia have been resolved using her methods. How does that work? Jake asked. Apparently, when you absolutely refuse to accept that a problem cannot be solved, you eventually find solutions that no one else thought to look for. The spiral wars ended last month when both sides decided to try something that had never been attempted before, building shared colonies instead of fighting over territory. Near the center of the chamber, Chief Sam Riley was teaching alien medical personnel about what he called creative healing. Species with completely different biologies were learning to adapt human medical techniques to their own physiology. Chief Riley has introduced the concept of impossible medicine, Vexthera explained. His philosophy is that if someone is sick, there has to be a way to make them better. You just have to be willing to try approaches that haven't been invented yet. Any success stories? Jake asked. He cured a plague on Corinth Prime that had been killing Corinthians for 3,000 years. The solution involved using quantum parasites as a delivery system for modified healing nanobots. When asked how he thought of such an approach, he said, and I quote, "Somebody had to try something crazy." Jake noticed that even the architecture of the station was changing. Walls that had been solid for millennia now shifted and flowed. Gravity worked in different directions in different areas. Time moved at various speeds in different sections, allowing species with different lifespans to interact comfortably. The Gateway Protocol has been busy, Vexthera noted, following Jake's gaze. It's been upgrading infrastructure throughout the galaxy. What used to be static, permanent structures are now adaptive and responsive. Buildings learn from their inhabitants and modify themselves to be more useful. And everyone's okay with that? Jake asked. Species that have been set in their ways for thousands of years are suddenly embracing constant change? Vexthera's crystal form flickered with amusement. It was difficult at first, but Captain Walsh suggested we try treating change as an adventure rather than a threat. The results have been remarkable. Jake could see what she meant. Everywhere he looked, aliens who had spent millennia following the same routines were experimenting with new approaches. Ancient species were learning from younger ones. Conservative civilizations were attempting radical innovations. Speaking of Captain Walsh, Jake said, where is the crew of the UES Defiance now? Currently attempting to rescue a civilization from outside our galaxy, Vexthera replied casually. The distance involved requires traveling through dimensions that don't technically exist. Most of our physicists consider it mathematically impossible. Most? Jake asked. Dr. Clark was very excited about the mathematical impossibility. She said it sounded like fun. Jake laughed. Of course she did. They reached the main display at the center of the chamber, which showed a real-time map of galactic civilization. Jake was amazed to see how much had changed in just 6 months. Trade routes now connected regions that had been isolated for millennia. Communication networks linked species that had never spoken before. Research collaboration spanned distances that would have been unthinkable before the Gateway Protocol's improvements. The most remarkable change, Vexthera said, is not in our technology or our capabilities. It's in our thinking. Your species taught us something we had forgotten, that the universe is not fixed. It can be improved. I'm not sure we taught you anything, Jake replied. We just approached problems differently. Yes, Vexthera agreed. You approached them as if they could be solved. This was a revolutionary concept for species that had learned to accept limitations. Near the edge of the chamber, Jake spotted something that made him smile. A group of young aliens from different species were working together on what looked like a child's toy, except the toy appeared to be manipulating gravity and creating small black holes for entertainment. Are those kids playing with fundamental forces of the universe? Jake asked. The younger generation has been particularly influenced by human thinking, Vexthera explained. They don't yet know what's impossible, so they attempt everything. Their games are advancing our understanding of physics faster than our research institutions managed in centuries. That's either wonderful or terrifying, Jake said. Both, Vexthera agreed cheerfully. We've had to develop new safety protocols for impossible science. As they watched, the young aliens successfully created a small pocket universe as a playground. Their parents and teachers, who would have been horrified by such reckless experimentation 6 months earlier, applauded and took notes. The children are calling their generation the try-anyway kid, Vexthera said. They've adopted human phrases as rallying cries. That's all has become particularly popular when adults tell them something is too difficult. Jake looked around the transformed council chamber, watching species that had been static for millennia, throwing themselves into impossible projects with enthusiastic determination. Vexthera, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy with these changes? Your people have been the same for thousands of years. Now everything is different. Vexthera was quiet for a moment, her crystal form shifting through different patterns of light. Jake, for 3,000 years, the Zephyrians have served as mediators and peacekeepers. We prided ourselves on our stability, our wisdom, our careful approach to change, and now Now I realize that stability can become stagnation, and wisdom can become fear of the unknown. Your species showed us that there's joy in... 2 years after the transformation of the Shadowmere Nebula, the galaxy was barely recognizable. Captain Ryan Walsh stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance, now extensively modified with technology that had been impossible when they first set out. They were currently stationed at the edge of the galaxy, preparing for another mission that every computer model declared mathematically impossible. "Captain," Dr. Amy Clark called from her lab, which had expanded to take up 3 decks of the ship. "You need to see this." Walsh made his way through corridors that now adjusted themselves based on traffic patterns and crew preferences. The Gateway Protocol had upgraded their ship so many times that it was less a vehicle and more a small ecosystem that happened to travel through space. Clark's lab was a chaos of impossible physics made routine. Gravity flowed in streams that allowed her to walk on the walls and ceiling, while working on different experiments. Time moved at different speeds in different areas, allowing her to run century-long experiments in the space of minutes. In one corner, she was growing new forms of matter from quantum foam. In another, she was teaching mathematics to sentient equations. "What's got you excited now, Doc?" Walsh asked, settling into a chair that materialized to catch him. Clark gestured to a holographic display showing what looked like a family tree, but with branches that extended in directions that didn't exist in normal space. "Walsh, look at this. The Gateway Protocol has been tracking the spread of human-style thinking throughout the galaxy. The results are incredible." Walsh studied the display. The tree showed how human approaches to problem-solving had spread from species to species, creating cascading effects that reached civilizations that had never even heard of Earth. "The Zephyrians learned from us how to treat impossible problems as engineering challenges," Clark explained, her hands dancing through the hologram to highlight different branches. "They taught the Eternals. The Eternals taught the Void Dwellers. The Void Dwellers taught species in the Outer Rim that we've never met. And now?" Walsh asked. "Now there's an entire generation of young beings throughout the galaxy who don't know that things are supposed to be impossible. They're calling themselves the Try-Anyway generation." The hologram shifted to show real-time examples from across the galaxy. On a world in the Spiral Arm, young Corinthians were building cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. In the gas giant cluster, juvenile Vortani were learning to exist as both gas and solid at the same time. Near the galactic core, adolescent beings whose species had no name were creating art that existed in 11 dimensions and could only be experienced by impossible senses. "It's not just the kids," Clark continued. "Adult civilizations that had been static for millennia are suddenly attempting things that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. The Eternal Council just approved a project to explore universes that haven't been created yet." Chief Sam Riley's voice came over the ship's communication system. "Captain, we've got incoming messages from about 50 different species. They all want to know if we can help them with impossible projects." Walsh grinned. "What kind of impossible projects?" "Let's see," Riley replied. "The Metalloids want to build a thinking planet. The Crystal Gardens want to grow spaceships from seeds. The Time Weavers want to create a present moment that lasts forever, and the Quantum Dancers want to invent a new form of mathematics that includes emotions." "Standard Tuesday, then," Walsh said. Lieutenant Maria Santos appeared in the lab doorway. "Captain, we're getting reports from the Intergalactic Rescue Mission. The civilization we went to help has decided to relocate their entire solar system to our galaxy, so they can participate in the impossible projects." "Can they do that?" Walsh asked. "According to every known law of physics, no," Clark replied cheerfully. "According to the Try-Anyway generation, they're about halfway done." Engineer Pete Johnson joined them, his clothes covered in substances that probably didn't exist in normal space. "Captain, I've been working with the Gateway Protocol on the ship's next upgrade. We think we can modify the Defiance to exist in multiple realities simultaneously." "Why would we want to do that?" Walsh asked. "So we can work on several impossible projects at once," Johnson explained. "Efficiency." Walsh looked around at his crew. In 2 years, they had gone from asteroid miners and military personnel to consultants on impossible physics and ambassadors of stubborn optimism. "You know," he said, "when I signed up for this job, I thought we were just going to fix a broken computer." "We did fix a broken computer," Clark pointed out. "It just happened to be a computer that was managing galactic civilization." "And now?" Walsh asked. Now we're fixing everything else, Santos said with satisfaction. The ship's main communication array lit up with an incoming priority message. The Gateway Protocol's familiar voice filled the lab. Captain Walsh, I have received an interesting communication. From where? Walsh asked. From a parallel universe where humanity never evolved. Their version of the Galactic Council is facing a crisis similar to what we experienced with my former self. They've heard rumors of the try-anyway approach and are requesting assistance. Walsh looked at his crew. Clark was already pulling up dimensional mathematics. Johnson was sketching modifications for interdimensional travel. Santos was planning first contact protocols for a universe full of aliens who had never heard of humans. Riley was calculating medical supplies for treating beings from an entirely different reality. When do they need us? Walsh asked. Yesterday, by their temporal calculations, the Gateway replied. However, I believe I can arrange for us to arrive then despite leaving now. Sounds reasonable, Walsh said. Any other complications? The parallel universe operates on different physical laws. What's impossible there might be merely difficult here, but what's routine here might be impossible there. Clark clapped her hands together excitedly. New impossible physics. This is going to be fun. As the crew prepared for their interdimensional mission, messages continued to pour in from across the galaxy. Young beings were attempting to build bridges between black holes. Ancient species were learning to think like teenagers. Conservative civilizations were embracing radical experimentation. Walsh received a personal message from Ambassador Jake Martinez on Kepler Prime. Jake's image appeared on the lab's communication screen, looking simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. Ryan, Jake said, I thought you should know. The Galactic Council just voted to establish a new position. They're calling it the Department of Impossible Things, and they want humanity to run it. What does the Department of Impossible Things do? Walsh asked. Officially, coordinate efforts to attempt projects that can't be done. Unofficially, make sure the galaxy doesn't get boring again. Walsh laughed. Sounds like our kind of job. There's more, Jake continued. The Try-Anyway generation has started a petition to rename the galaxy. They want to call it the Why Not Galaxy. I like it, Santos said. It has a nice ring to it, Riley agreed. The Gateway Protocol's voice joined the conversation. Captain Walsh, I have been analyzing the success rate of impossible projects since your species joined the galactic community. And? Walsh asked. Statistically speaking, impossibility appears to be experiencing a system-wide failure. We may need to develop new categories of difficulty to replace it. Dr. Clark looked up from her calculations. I've got a suggestion. How about haven't tried yet, tried once and needs more coffee? I like those categories, the Gateway said. They seem more accurate than our previous classification system. As the UES Defiance prepared to depart for a parallel universe, where impossibility still worked the old way, Walsh took one last look around the lab. His crew was preparing for a mission that would have been incomprehensible 2 years ago. Throughout the galaxy, species that had been stagnant for millennia were attempting things that defied every natural law. And somewhere in another reality, beings who had never heard of humans were about to discover that impossible was just another word for untried. You know what the best part is? Walsh said to his crew. What's that, Captain? Clark asked, not looking up from her interdimensional calculations. 2 years ago, we just wanted to fix a computer. Now we're apparently in the business of fixing reality itself. Reality needed fixing, Johnson pointed out. It was too limited. Besides, Riley added, somebody had to try. The UES Defiance began to shift dimensions, reality bending around it like fabric around a needle. As they departed for a universe where the impossible was still impossible, Walsh settled into his captain's chair and grinned. All right, people, he said to his crew. Let's go show another reality what that's all means. Behind them, the Why Not Galaxy continued its impossible projects on schedule. Every Tuesday, something that couldn't be done was done anyway. Every Wednesday, someone found a new way to improve the universe. Every day, the Try-Anyway generation proved that the only real impossibility was giving up. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, the Gateway Protocol maintained the networks that connected impossible achievements across multiple realities, ensuring that no universe would ever have to face impossibility alone. The age of impossible things had ended. The age of why not had begun, and it was only getting started.